Okay, cool. So, hello everyone. Here we are talking about React Native Architecture. Are you able to see my full screen here? If anyone can, wait, if present. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you so much, Adrika and Kristen. And thank you so much everyone for joining this topic. One of the things that I was researching in my 3 months, and I was like, I was so into it. I was struggling with understanding C plus plus. I was struggling with understanding what the hell C plus plus is doing in JavaScript and all these things. Then I sit back, I relax, and I want all of you to sit back and relax. I am not going to I'm not going to scare you off by showing you some C++, Java, and Objective C code. But this is gonna be a very simple talk. We are gonna discuss like we are five. So we are not gonna talk in very really high terminologies like Fabric, Codegen, and JSI. Obviously, JSI is gonna be there, but I'll try my best to explain you in very simple manner. This is this is why we have an talk. So let's get started. A quick disclaimer here. I know I don't like it at all, but sometimes it's really important. This is what I have learned till now. Like this is my research of 3 months. So at some point, if you think that I may wrong, that's totally okay. And if some point, if you think that I have understood things in the wrong way, you are always welcome to like correct me in a Slack DM or in this talk as well. So yes, and that's it. And obviously, just chill, guys. Just relax. We are not going to go into that technical discussion of React Native architecture. It's gonna be a very simple talk. And as I mentioned in my talk as well, this is more than just a GeekSpeak. So if you think that you know what I want to be a part of this GeekSpeaks, you can just leave your message in the leave your message in the chat and we will talk. So this is more like interactive and a little fun session. So let's get started. So again, a quick disclaimer: 95% of whatever I'm going to show you here, you are not going to implement it by yourself, obviously. So why? And I know that your reaction will be like, "Oh damn, we are literally spending Friday evening with you, and you are like, whatever you're gonna tell is not gonna work it." Chill, relax. So let's get started and let's understand why. So, but yeah, if you talk about the 5% of the time, it is really important because if you have worked with any real world project, you must have encountered with these errors like native modules are not working. Android app is really slow. Like my Android app is really sluggy. Client is keep complaining about, you know what, can we do something about this? Our app is really slow. It feels like we are in 2000 and application get crashed native side. Obviously, you can do anything if your application is getting crashed on native side because we are web developers again, guys, and we only know to write JavaScript, and JavaScript is like our first love. And you are telling me to write code in Java and C++. That's not gonna work here, right? So this everything comes in just 5%, and this is what I want you guys to understand in very simple manner. Again, I will try my best. So learn native. I'm not telling you to learn native. This is just a very simple overview. And again, like I told you, you are not going to, you're not going to do this thing by yourself. So don't worry about it. Okay. Yeah, but the intention of this geek speak is that you build your own mental model. That means, let's say if you're stuck somewhere, or let's say if someone is asking you that, you know what, I want to learn about React Native architecture, but I don't know what is it. Then this talk will help you to like understand what is the new architecture and what is the current architecture, obviously. And yeah, so the point is that you build your mental model in a very simple way. Okay, cool. First, why? Yeah, it always starts with why. Why, as a JavaScript developer, I want to explore something which is completely new. To Google better, obviously. Imagine you are stuck with yourself for 2 days because you don't know that Java code. You are just copying the same error message in the Google, and they are telling you, you know what you should do. You should configure something in Android Studio, or you should configure something in Xcode, and it will work fine. But you know that, like you never encountered this thing with before, right? So you are like, you know what? I don't know. Can you can you give me some good solution, like some JavaScript solution, so like I can implement it rather than asking me to open Android Studio and implement this thing my own. Okay, so that's why we are here. That's why we want to understand what is the React native side. Okay, a quick recap. I know that some of you guys don't have any idea about what is the current architecture in React Native, and how this thing working under the hood. So I'll give you a quick recap about the bridge architecture. And yes, it looks like a magic, but it's not. Obviously, like when I in 2019, when I write my first application in React Native, I was so fascinated by the thing because I'm writing code in JavaScript and everything happening natively in my application. So like I'm writing a code for a button, and you will see that button in a phone. Like it is a magic, right? So for 1 year, I was like, okay, you know what? It's magic. We got lucky, so we can write a code in JavaScript. It's really magic. But then, yes, then I am a quite of overthinker. So I had decided, you know what? I want to know. I want to know how this thing working under the hood, right? Otherwise, let's say if I'm stuck somewhere, I would never, I would never get to recover that for myself, right? So that's the reason I started to learn the native side. So yeah, a quick review for a bridge architecture. But what the hell is bridge architecture, right? I don't know anything about the bridge architecture. I can write code in JavaScript, and I don't care how this thing is getting executed under the hood. But let's be real. So what happened is that we have a JavaScript world and we have a native world. Now you can't neglect the fact that it is communicating somehow. Like our JavaScript world is communicating with the Android world, and how this communication happens, because the JavaScript is totally different and the Android is totally different, right? So how this cross communication language communication happens, so that's why we have something called bridge. And 99% of the all the React Native apps currently in 2022, 7th October, they are using this bridge architecture. So the bridge architecture is nothing but it's a way to communicate between the JavaScript world and a native world. Consider this bridge architecture as a black hole. Now you know that black hole, if you are like a physics fan, you know that a black hole is something that lets you communicate between the multiverses. Okay, I don't know more about the physics, but yeah. So what happens that let's suppose you are writing code in JavaScript. That JavaScript code basically gets serialized into a string. So basically you are sending a one request, like we send a one request to the server and server responses back. So this bridge architecture helps you to provide that communication. So basically what we do is that we basically send a message to the Java world through this bridge. So let's suppose if you're writing a code that basically create a button, right? What happening is under the hood is that your React Native has a bridge which basically gets serialize your data and send it back to the Java world. Now here is the one thing that needs to understand. The bridge is asynchronized. Now, what does that mean? What is the meaning of asynchronized, right? That means is that you know that JavaScript itself has an asynchronized nature. That means you don't know where this thing will be done, but you are sure that it will be done in some way, like promises, like promises. Like you know that promises are asynchronized, but we know that it's going to be happen sometime. So that's why we put the then and catch law. And data serialization is really important. Now, what is data serialization? You know that JavaScript has that own data structure and Java has their own data structure, right? Now imagine Java is encountering with the object of the JavaScript. Now if you know in Java there is no concept of object, right? Now what so Java will think that, you know what, I don't know what is object. I know what is map. I know what is string, but I don't know what is object. So we have to provide some cross communication between the languages. That means that one language able to talk with another language. Now I know this is a little hard to get it, but data serialization is a thing that we do in by sending requests as well. Like if you are working with a fetch, what we do is that we send our data with serialized manner. Like we use data.stringify. So, the point is that you need a one format of data that can be understood by everyone. Like here I am from Gujarat, so I can understand Gujarati. But if I start speaking in Gujarati, you will immediately drop the call. So that's why there is a one medium and this is a language called English. So with help of that, we understood. Okay, so you can understood, right? And also like Java. So once we serialize the data, we can basically so this data can be understood by different language like Objective C and C++. And yeah, it is basically a queue. So what happens is that let's suppose if you are clicking on the button, like let's say user has clicked on the button. Now technically you are sending those data into a native world. Now native world means like you tell your Java, like, hey, I am clicking the button. I want to see something in my screen. So this is how the bridge architecture is working. Like once you click on the button, right, you are sending some data to the native world. And then in native side, let's suppose if you are showing some alert pop up, then it will be happen. Let's suppose if you are doing some API request, it will be happen. So you know that there is an important part of bridge. It's really important because without bridge, JavaScript will not able to communicate between the Android world and the JavaScript world. So this is why the bridge is really important and we cannot neglect it. So it's basically a queue. So let's suppose if you are clicking button twice and thrice, so you are sending basically a three times signal. And consider this thing as a signal. Let's suppose if you are doing something, if you are scrolling your list, you are basically sending a signal to the native world through the bridge. Is it like communicating through a portal, or is it like communicating through a phone call? Like, hey, I am sending this data, I am clicking on this button, I am scrolling the scroll view list. So please show this exact thing in the native side. This is how the this is how the bridge architecture works. And this is a very like this. I know that this diagram doesn't make any sense, but imagine this is a JavaScript universe and this is a native universe. I like to talk about the universes manner because you know that if both universes are different, then we need some way so they can communicate with each other, right? So for this one, we have a bridge again. So this bridge basically send your data back and forth. Imagine you two are living in the different cities. Like I'm living in Surat, you are living in Bangalore. Now we need some way to communicate. So how do we communicate with each other? Through a Slack, sometimes email, Google Meet. So you can imagine that self as a bridge. So without this thing, we cannot able to communicate. So we are sending a data to the JavaScript universe and the native universe. Like I told you, it is really important to have a communication. Otherwise, your JavaScript universe will never know what is happening on a native side, and your native universe will never know what is happening on a JavaScript side. Did you notice one thing why we saw the native view like native button in Android and native button in iOS? Because JavaScript doesn't handle anything like that. JavaScript basically give you a state. Like because you know that React is really smart enough, right? React, why we use React? Because it is really smart enough to differentiate what it needs to be updated. But that native part still happen in a native side. So we are basically sending a control. Like you know what? Update this thing. You know what? Change my scroll position to this one. So again, JavaScript and React is only used to control your native world. JavaScript itself does not create a view or JavaScript itself does not create a button. It basically handled by your native world. But what JavaScript and React does is that it basically send a control in form of the data. Again, so if you are, let's suppose if you are telling native world, you know what, I need an input field in which I can send, so user can type. So you created a text input component, and that component gets rendered in the native side. And let's suppose if user is writing its name, the state is getting updated, right? So you are sending that information again to the native world. And can you imagine how fast it is going? How fast it is happening? Yes, it is really fast, but it is really slow. Flutter Dev. Okay, anyone's Flutter Dev is currently like attending this talk. I know that most of not only that developers, but I think like 60% of the people are complaining about it. You know what? Our app is really slow, yeah. Especially in Android. Like I'm working on a project, and there is a one problem. Everything's happening fine on iOS side, but when it's come to an Android, it becomes sluggish. And especially if you are working with some different modules. Let's suppose if you are building an app, something like a WhatsApp or a Slack. So many things are happening under the hood. So your application becomes sluggish because our Android device is not that much capable to handle this thing at the same time. So sometimes you will feel a sluggishness in your app. But why? Let's understand why. Yeah. So here I am here to defend React Native. I'll tell you the one thing that not every time you will get the sluggish behavior. Sometimes I can understand our application gets sluggish because let's suppose our JavaScript thread get busy. Yeah, but not every time, guys. So relax. React Native is so awesome. Yeah. So this is a bridge. This is a photo of Bangalore. As you can see, everyone's stuck in traffic. So this is what happening in a bridge, right? Now I told you like bridge is the only way to communicating between the JavaScript world and native world. Imagine you are sending data back and forth to your native world. Like you are scrolling your list so fastly. You have noticed the thing like when we scroll our flat list so fast, we see some blank space. Why? Because our bridge is already busy. Our bridge is busy to doing the other thing. Now we are again sending data back and forth. It's like a Bangalore traffic, right? Every Friday, every Saturday, if you wanna go outside at evening, you will see this thing, and you have to wait. You have to wait unless the traffic in front of you doesn't move. So this is what happens. So let's suppose if multiple things are happening at the same time and your bridge gets stuck, like the Bangalore bridge, then you have to wait, and that's the only reason you are seeing the blank space, or that's the only reason when you click on the button you don't see any feedback because your JavaScript thread and your bridge is already busy doing other thing. So what? So is there any way we can reduce this thing? Is there any way we can avoid this thing? Yeah, there is a one way. But let's talk about JS thread, JavaScript thread. As you know that we all are web developers and we are pretty much aware of JavaScript thread. First, it is a single threaded language. That means it can do only one thing at a time. So if you are doing multiple things at a time, you should avoid it and you should use promise, something like, because you know that the JavaScript architecture is really cool. So let's suppose if there is something which is going to take a more time, what you can do, you can put that thing on a promise, and once it gets resolved, you will get the data. Yes. So avoid that high computation thing on JavaScript. You should profile your application if you are thinking that my app is sluggy. But still, even though our JavaScript, let's suppose even though our JavaScript thread is so fast, but what about the native world? We can't do anything about native world because again, we are web developers and we don't know anything about the native world, right? So what we can do? So today we're gonna talk about this, right? The JSI thing is coming. So don't go anywhere. Yeah. So this is what happens. So this is what happened typically in Android applications, right? As you can see, uh, we are scrolling through the list. We see the blank space within the flat list. Why? Why is it that? Because again, our thread is busy. Our JavaScript thread is so busy, and our bridge is basically processing the sum data. That's why, and that's why we see blank screen while scrolling. That's why we see unresponsive design, and that's why when we click on the button, we don't see anything. So I hope you have found a reason why React Native is slow till now. Obviously, till now. Why React Native is slow? Because you know that Bridge is the only one way to communicate between the JavaScript world and native world. So let's suppose if Bridge get broken, it's like is there a village? Let's suppose there are two villages, and the bridge is only way to communicate with the village. Now let's suppose if bridge gets fallen, or let's suppose the bridge is under the construction, or bridge is busy. So many people are traveling to the bridge. You can imagine the thing, right? No, so yeah, the thing will process slowly. So that's why bridge is not option. We cannot use bridge. A new era. So again, the problem is not JavaScript but bridge itself. Sometimes people understand. Sometimes people wrongly understand. You know what? JavaScript is a slow language because it's a single-threaded language. So what? Single-threaded doesn't justify the performance of the app. The thing is that the communication happening between the two worlds, the two universe, again the JavaScript universe and Android universe, it is slow. So even though your JavaScript is processing computing really fast, but let's suppose what if the bridge is not ready to take a data? What if the bridge is still processing the same thing? You have to wait it. Like it's like a queue. You can't go through it unless it's empty. So, yeah, this is a new part. So I'm so excited to talk about JSI, a new era of React Native. And this is where React Native is changing from the scratch. Yes, from the scratch, React Native is getting changed. First, JSI is the foundation of React Native architecture. I know, guys, you may have heard this term JSI in many talks or maybe in many blogs, and you try to understand it. You know what? I want to understand what is JSI, but I cannot because they are using so many heavy terminologies that I'm not aware of it. So yeah, let's see it. Let's make it very simple. So allow me to introduce you with a new architecture, the foundation of new architecture, which is a JSI, a JavaScript interface. why it is why it is named as a JavaScript interface, because it provides you the interface to a JavaScript. So let's understand the key points of the JSI. So first of all, it basically provides a communication between the JS and the host, like the same thing. Right? This is what the bridge was doing, providing communication between the JavaScript and the Android. But it is a asynchronous and synchronized manner. Now, this is really game changing, guys, because till now the bridge was asynchronized. So, let's suppose if you are clicking on the button, right? So you don't know when you get the response because this process is asynchronized. But right now, here we are getting synchronized manner. That means it's a reactivity, right? What is a reactivity? Let's suppose if you are clicking on something, you will get immediate response. You don't have to get anything. So this means that you can get so data can be processed in a synchronized manner, and this is completely written in C++. Yeah. So earlier the bridge was written in a native languages like in Android it was written in Java, in in iOS it was written in Objective C, but this is completely written in C++. And if you know that C++ has the most performance benefit, so this is like I don't have to more justify about the JSI because C++ is very close to our hardware, right? So that's why we get a more performance benefit. And sometimes we get a performance like a native. So people probably want to build their app in a native environment because they don't want to compromise with the performance. But don't worry, till now we were having a performance issue, but now we are not having any. But how? How these things are working? Okay. So the thing is that what happens is that JavaScript, if you know, I know that you haven't gotten into that deep in a JavaScript world, but you know that JavaScript can invoke your C++ method. That means your two languages can communicate with each other, right? The JavaScript can communicate with the C++. Now, if you know that, I know that Android can also execute the C++ code. So there is a method called GNI. If you want to know about it, JavaScript native interface. So the thing is that the point is that they both universe can communicate with the C++ because JavaScript can also invoke some C++ method. And in the Xcode, if you know that there are some file called C++ like .mm. MM is an extension for a C++. So that means that Xcode was able to execute a C++ code, and so does Android. Android needs to go one step further because Android out of the box does not execute C++, but yeah, it provides you a support for a C++. So again, Android as a support, Android as a C++ support. Xcode itself compiles C++ code out of the box, and JavaScript is also invoke the C++ method. So what does that mean? Okay, we get it that all the universes, let's suppose JavaScript universe and native universe, they both are aware of C++. But what does that mean? How this is working under the hood? So putting everything together. So JSI basically eliminate the concept of bridge. It basically eliminate the concept of bridge. That was the mean. So what JSI does that, it basically take your native methods reference, it registers that reference into a JSI layer, and it exposes that method into a JavaScript runtime. Okay, stop it, Darshan. This is a little hard to understand. Okay, let's make it slowly. So what happens is that let's suppose you wanna call a native method. Let's suppose you wanna create a native view. What JSI does that instead of sending data back and forth, JSI basically tell you, you know what, I know the address. Like I know the address of this method. I'll give you the address. You just have to go there and you have to call it by yourself. So JSI is telling you that, you know what, bro, I'm not going to do anything. You have to do it by yourself. This is what JSI is doing for you. JSI basically register the reference of the native method into a JSI layer, and basically it exposes that method into a JavaScript. So what is it is doing is that it basically exposing all the methods, or it basically creating all the methods when your JavaScript is getting run. So this is what JSI is doing. So it is feel like that method was exist in a JavaScript for a long time, right? It is again it is feeling like that method was exist in a JavaScript runtime for so long. So it is feel like calling a native method. Like we call a fetch function, we call alert function, and there are so many functions in JavaScript. So it feels like we are calling a JavaScript function itself. So this is what JSI is. JSI is giving the native feeling instead of waiting for a data to get executed on. So this is what JSI is doing it. So can you imagine how fast it is? This is a basically a very basic diagram of what JSI is doing it, right? Again, what JSI tells JavaScript is that, you know what, I'm not gonna do anything for you. I'll give you the address of this particular native method. Let's suppose there is a method which calculate the height and width of the button. So what JSI is does that it basically take the reference of that button that and it put it on it put it on here in JSI, and eventually when your JavaScript is getting running, you can it expose that method. So let's suppose you have a method called calculate sum in a native method in a Java site. So what JSI does that it basically tags a reference of that native method into a JavaScript, and it basically expose this method into a JS universe itself. So this is how the JSI is working. No more bridge, no more communication issue. You can directly call a native method with help of the reference. Now, what is a reference? You can imagine reference as an address or a location of that native method, because you know that under the hood, in very low level, everything is getting stored in a register. Everything is getting stored in some memory. So we have an address, right? So imagine that this is what happening. We have an address. JSI is giving us an address, and it's basically taking that method from that address and it exposing that method into a JavaScript. So it feels like it is a method of JavaScript, but it is not. Yeah. So communication with C++ is really important. I want you to take a look of how communication is working, because you know that okay, this is really fancy talk. Like yeah, JSI is really cool, but under the hood we still don't get it. Like what is JSI and how this thing working under the hood. So if I tell you the one thing, JSI is nothing but a new interface or a new function provided by a Facebook developers. So they basically created a new they basically written a function which basically communicate between a JavaScript world and a native world, right? So there is nothing new, there is nothing fancy, but C++ was able to communicate between the two languages. It's like let's suppose I know a Gujarati and there is a guy who know Kannada, but we don't know any other language than Kannada and Gujarati. So that is very hard to communicate between us. So there is another guy called JSI. He knows Kannada and he also knows Gujarati. So what he's going to do is that he will communicate in behalf of me to that guy, and he will communicate in behalf of that guy to the me. So this is like a middleman. You can also consider JSI as a middleman. And I want you to take a look at the power of C++. Like the C++ is really like a powerful language when it's come to a performance. Yeah, I know that people don't like writing code in C++ because it is like writing code in C++ is like writing so many codes, because we have to define everything. We have to take care of memory management by ourselves. I know everything. But yeah, we cannot ignore the fact that React Native is now going to power by C++. So what does that mean? Okay. So again, JSI is a black hole. I already mentioned this thing in the beginning of the talk, but yeah, it is basically providing you a way to communicate between the JavaScript world and the native world. And yeah, so my React Native app is slow. I got a JSI. Now I have to learn C++. Okay, you must be thinking, so now I have to learn C++. No, you don't have to learn anything new. Till now, whatever I have explained you is basically how the React Native is going to work under the hood with the new architecture. So we are a consumer. We are basically a consumer who use the React Native framework. So we don't have to worry about it how this is getting executed. But if you are a library maintainer, if you have some idea that you know what I can improve this thing in React Native, or if you want to do some open source contributor in a React Native, you must need to understand how this thing works under the hood, right? Otherwise, you are just writing code in JavaScript, so you don't have any idea about it, like how React Native things work under the hood. So that's why you need to understand the JSI architecture. Otherwise, it's okay. Like after this talk, you can still enjoy your regular life. You can still write code in JavaScript without worrying about how this thing working under the hood. So this is how the so this is like advanced stuff. I know this is really advanced, and not every React Native dev is interested to understand this thing. But like if you understand this thing, and if you have any idea, you can create a library. You can create some custom view and all. So this is why you should learn what is JSI. But yeah, you don't have to learn C++ because I'm working with JSI for 3 months, and there is some point I have to write a very small chunk of CSS code. Sorry, C++ code. Again, sorry, web developers. What can we do? So yes. So is it not like you have to learn C++ to understand the JSI architecture? It's okay if you don't know what is a C++, and it's also okay if you don't understand is what is a JSI. Okay, that's really fine. If you want to connect with me by end of this call, we will try to understand what is JSI in very simple manner. If you still don't get it, again, JSI is a web worker. I really like this thing because if you know what is web worker is basically available in a web browser. So web worker is something like a second thread of JavaScript. So let's suppose if you are doing something heavy computation in a JavaScript site, you can call your web workers, and you can call a web worker and you can just wait for the response unless that web worker doesn't execute your process, and you will get a response. Now, what is the benefit of web worker? So it basically make your JavaScript thread free. So your JavaScript thread is free. That means your website will work as expected. So imagine that a web worker as a JSI, because this is what I have encountered till now. So like last week, me and my team was working on some performance issue. So I thought, you know what, I can write code in I know a little bit C++. What we can do, can we move this chunk of JavaScript code which is causing the performance issue? Can we move this code from JavaScript to C++? And it was easy. So what happens that imagine you are executing this code in C++ and you are executing this code in JavaScript. You can imagine the performance benefits, right? C++ has more performance benefits. So let's suppose if you are encountered with some situation in which JavaScript is taking a long time to execute that code. Let's suppose encryption and decryption. Encryption and decryption are the like it takes a long time because you still need to do some heavy computation under the hood. So what you can do is that you can write that chunk of code in C++, or you cannot. It's really up to you, because and again I'm telling you, you don't have to learn anything. There is some libraries available out there who is actually doing this thing, right? So yeah, I know this talk is almost done, but I want to take a look of the pillar of the new architecture. So till now we have discussed about what is a new architecture and how we can use it. There is also another terminology that we introduced, and I don't want you to get into it right now because you can just read some blog, you can read some, or you can watch some TED talk to understand better what is Fabric and Turbo modules. But yeah, so there are also something called Fabric and Turbo modules. So just take so first of all, like I told you, JavaScript is responsible for managing all the state, and React Native has a renderer who does render all the native stuff. And again, it was asynchronous and it basically take time. I'll mention a one link in which you can understand how your tree is getting built. Now, eventually we are building a tree. So there is a shadow tree and there is a React tree. So shadow tree basically create a tree with help of the React tree. But these things are asynchronous. Again, so if it is asynchronous, we don't know when it's gonna get done. So that's the problem. Like asynchronous is really fine. But if you want a performance, or let's say if you want your application to work better, you cannot rely on asynchronous. So what JSI is doing is that it's basically trying to keep this world close. So like your Android and JavaScript is basically so close. So now it feels like a native. So what Fabric does is that Fabric is a new renderer. It basically calculate and build the shadow tree with help by looking at the React tree, and it is help working in a asynchronous manner. What does that mean? Synchronized manner. What does that mean? So let's suppose as long as you are building tree in your JavaScript world, it is building that same tree in a React world, React Native world. Now I know that if you don't know anything about tree, that's totally fine. I'll link a one blog link in which you can understand what is a fabric and all this thing. But yeah, like at the end of the talk, I wanted to know you that JSI is not the only one who is getting changed in React Native architecture. There are something known as a fabric is also there, right? And again, native modules. Uh, in our lifetime, there is a chance that we have edited a Java code. Like we are, it's like it's like registering a new package, right? So what does that mean? So basically, we are registering a native modules in a JavaScript side, in a Java site and also in a JavaScript site. So also this is again like, let's suppose I want to access a battery of an Android app, or let's suppose I want to access the storage of an Android app, right? So JavaScript doesn't know anything about it. So we need some way. We have a bridge, but also we can expose native modules on that bridge. So what does that mean? That means is that we can actually control all the hardware related things with the native modules. But again, this has some caveats like slow boot up time, unnecessary thing. So this is also going to get replaced by a turbo modules. It is powered by JSI and it basically loads lazily. So like what happened in native modules is that you have to load up everything, but in a turbo modules you basically can avoid this thing and you can lazy load all the modules. This is I know that this is a really advanced stuff, and as a beginner you should avoid it right now. But at some point you need to understand all these things because I have myself written a native modules. So yeah, this is not like you cannot ignore it, but yeah, it is something practical example. So yeah, JSI is being used by a lot of community. Even myself, I'm using JSI in my current client project. So we are using JSI in production, and we see a very significant amount of performance benefits in our application. Now, what is the meaning of using JSI in your app? Did I write code by myself? No, I'm using a library which is powered by JSI. So there are so many libraries like React Native and MQV. Like last week I have posted a one thing. There is a library called React Native MNKV, which is the replacement of asynchronized storage. Now you know that asynchronized storage is really slow. It basically takes time, so you cannot store your important data in that storage. So there is a library called React Native MMKV, which is written in C++. So that basically store data in synchronized manner, and it is really fast. It's 30% faster than the React Native asynchronized storage, right? So we are using JSI in our client project, and we are using it in the production. And I'm going to use heavily in a production because again I'm still exploring JSI and I'm not a pro, obviously. So there are some part that I have still need to explore, but yeah, this is really game changing, and I think React Native will be evolve a lot, and a lot of things is going to be changed. But I don't think so. As a JavaScript developer, we don't need to learn anything new. But yeah, if you are a library maintainer, if you want to explore the internals of React Native, then you may need to explore a lot of things, right? Now, yeah, where we are heading. So I think still JSI is there, but I think it will take around 1.5 year to 2 years to adopt the JSI. Let me tell you why. Because 90% of the React Native apps are still using the old architecture, the bridge architecture, right? The migration is really big deal because let's suppose if you are working with some project and you are using so many third-party libraries, so that third-party library needs to migrate first. Let's suppose React Native device info. That is the one library which provides you the information of devices, right? So if that library doesn't have a JSI support, then you cannot use JSI eventually. So that means to make sure, if let's suppose if you want to explore JSI, make sure that any third party library you are using, it have a JSI support because it's really important. So again, I think React Native is going to be a really game changing, especially in mobile development. So yes, because eventually now there is no performance issue. Everything is gonna load up so fast. Everything is going to feel like a very fast. So I don't think so. Now we are gonna have any performance issue, right? So thanks a lot. Thank you so much for listening me. I know it was really. I know this was not that hard to understand what is JSI and all. So that was it. Thank you so much for joining.